All right. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We are back. Today we will be deviating a little bit from our normal Torah portion. We only got a couple more weeks left before the new year comes. There's also only a couple more chapters, so I'm gonna hold off this week, and we'll jump back into the Torah portion after I come back from the little trip. But this week we are going to be looking at key verse we're going to look at is in John chapter 1 verse 17. We'll read up to it and deal with what we find there in verse 17. Something interesting in that verse. Well, we'll see what's so interesting when we get there. But we're gonna read from verse 1 down to 17, just so we can get the context. Let me pull up the verse here. Okay, if we can read verse 1 down through verse 17.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. He was in the beginning with Elohim. All came to be through him, and without him, not even one came to be that came to be. For in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shine in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from Elohim, whose name was Yonan. This one came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all might believe through him. He was not that light, but that he might bear witness of the light. He was a true light, which enlightens every man coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came to be through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the authority to become children of Elohim, to those believing in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the desire of flesh, nor of the desire of man, but of Elohim, who is Yah. And the word became flesh and pitched his tent amongst us. And he saw his esteem as of an only brought forth of a father, complete in favor and truth. Yohanan bore witness of him and cried out, saying, this was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has become before me, because he was before me. And out of his completeness, we all did receive and favor upon favor. For the Torah was given through Moshe. The favor and the truth came through Yeshua, Mashiach.
Okay, good. Okay, read that verse 17 again right there. Verse 17.
For the Torah was given through Moshe, Moses. The favor and the truth came through Yeshua, from Mashiach.
Okay, so what we want to do is deal with this verse here, 17. I'm having a hard time selecting this thing. I gotta use two fingers. For the Torah was given through Moses, favor and the truth came through Messiah. So, first of all, when we read that verse, just looking at it, well, let's what What are some thoughts when we hear that verse right there? Just before I say what I want about it.
You know what the thought I hear? If you want something done right, do it yourself. She laughing. You know, I look at it as Yah doing it himself. He enters the world. He entered the world he's created through his own creation. He puts on the clothing of his own creation, and he walks amongst his own creation, teaching his own creation to view him as Father and the true creator. Then in turn, dies, gives himself up, sacrifices for his own creation, that his own creation can be reconciled back to himself. Man, is he powerful. That's what I get out of that.
Well, I mean, you kind of gave a synopsis really of all the verses coming down.
I ain't mean to put that.
But I want to actually deal with this verse 17. For the Torah was given through Moses, and the favor and the truth came through Messiah.
Oh,
now, anybody what
I'm taking it like
just talk up so we can hear you.
Yeah.
I'm like the directions, like the way was given to Moses. I guess like the instructions was given through Moses, and then the actions was shown through Jesus Christ. Like that he like is that's the way I'm taking it.
What you saying? The actions is like the favor and the truth. You saying?
Right, like the truth, like the truth. It basically showed through Jesus.
I get. Well,
Yeshua.
Yeah.
Yeshua, sorry, Yeshua. I gotta get used to saying.
I'm thinking that it's saying basically the law was given by Moses. Moses was the one who actually gave the law, like who was actually telling people, you know what I mean, which way to go or what to do, or you know what I mean, what not to do. But the truth actually came through. Is it Yeshua?
Yeah.
That is true.
So more so like Moses was more so the messenger.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm just, hearing what you guys had to say about it. It's not like it's right or wrong here. We trying to see like when you hear that verse, what do it make you think about? You got any thoughts about it?
I'm gonna say something first.
Yeah, Moses was used as the vessel that could say that message to get the commandments, and then Yeshua is the one, how I read it, is the one who is able to basically fulfill it, or for it to be fulfilled within us.
Okay.
What I get out of it, what I do get out of it, that Moshe brought forth the laws to expose us and let us know that we were sinning, and the laws that we should adhere to do was pleasing to Yah. And the favor and the truth came through Yeshua, who was Yah in the flesh, who demonstrated with himself and practiced also and taught the Torah in action and applied them also to his teachings. For the Torah was given to those children of Israel as a tutor until the coming of the Messiah to fulfill it in all actuality.
Okay, so all right, so when we look at this, it's interesting. Read you got the King James? Read the King James, what that say? Verse 17, yeah.
Okay. It says, "For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Yeshua, Jesus Christ."
Okay, so is that but italicized in there?
Yeah. You don't look like it unless you determine. I don't think so.
Yeah.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. So the King James, the way the King James reads is it kind of puts it's kind of make like a comparison, contrast kind of a thing. whenever words are italicized in the King James, they're added kind of for, to keep the thought. So the thought, hold on, can you grab that Bible right there that's under the Apocrypha? Is that brown? Yeah, let me see that. That's a New American Standard there. I'm looking at this because New American Standard also is a literal translation.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, it leaves the but out here. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Yeshua. Okay, so the but was something that's added. It's not in this version that we looked at. It's not in the New American Standard. But there is kind of a contrast that's going on in terms of there was a thing that Moshe did, and there was a thing that Yeshua did. Yeshua had a task that he came to fulfill,
Right.
and Moshe also had a task that he came to fulfill. So let's just do this slowly. I don't want to move too quickly.
Right.
Let's look at, first of all, let's look at this word here. Here, since this is they King James says law, right? The law was given through Moses. Let's look at this real quick here. Dictionary. Need this version. The law. Actually want to look at this. Okay, nomos. Let's see here. To divide among, parcel out, allot. Etymologically, something parceled out, allotted. What one has in use and possession. Custom in the New Testament is translated as law.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at these words, these Greek words, it kind of, you don't get much from it, right? It's when we look at these words, whenever you see law, it's probably going to be this nomos word, which just literally just giving you the idea of law, but it can be used in different ways. But the thing that I wanted to bring out is one of the ways that we see, if I scroll down here far enough to make this bigger. Oh, wait. Not that one, not that one. Oh, yeah, this one here. I want to look at this here because this is something that I want to. Okay, so when we think about, there's a word that is anachronistic. Anachronistic. If we was to talk about chilling, right?
Yeah.
For us in this time, chilling is like it don't have nothing to do with the weather. Like it's like you're relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
So if we was to look backwards in time and you saw somebody say use that word, they wouldn't be talking about relaxing. They would be talking about, a temperature.
Right.
So anachronistic is thinking about something from your time and putting that thought backwards. where it don't necessarily fit. So I'm saying that just to say, whenever like this word here that we're about to look at and talk about, this word here, metonymy, it's a Greek kind of concept, but that comes with rhetoric, it's Greek thought process. But at the same time, even though it is that, you're able to look back and kind of see that these actions are being done, even though at the time the actions were being done, they weren't necessarily calling it a metonymy. So maybe I gotta explain that a little better, but let's first of all look at what metonymy is, right? So first of all, this word law is used in the metonymy in the sense of metonymy, which is let's see if I can put the definition of this on here. Define. Oh wow, look at that. Okay. It is a trope in which one word is put for another, a change of names which have some relation to each other, as when we say a man keeps a good table. What was that one I was saying is at the end? A man has a clear head, right? That is understanding, intellect. If I was to say John's clear-headed, that don't mean that I could see through his head. Right? It's talking about his understanding and his yes. So if you can use a word that means these other things that don't necessarily mean what the literal word means.
True.
So we see in scripture, and we'll show examples that some of these writers in the Bible are using a word, and us now thinking about it the way we think about it, we're thinking about it different because we just see the word. So we're putting the definition of the word and we're not and applying it to something where it don't necessarily belong, when what's actually happening is he's using this rhetorical style, this metonymy. He's using a word that means other words. Mm-hmm. But we're not picking up on what he's doing because we're not looking at it properly. So because that word law, noma, is used in this sense, is used as the book of the law, is used as particularly the books of Moses or the Pentateuch, as forming part of the Old Testament, law and prophets, and so on and so forth. So this metonymy thing that we see, again, not necessarily that these people that John was thinking about, I'm going to put this metonymy word right here, but he's using a word that doesn't necessarily hold its own definition, but it's kind of a category for a thing. And again, as we go on, we can see this more. Now, the first way that we can see that this is the case is when we look at this, again, if we take the but out, we just keep this as a complete sentence here, but thinking about the idea of this kind of comparison and contrast. For the Torah was given through Moses, the favor and the truth came through Yeshua Messiah. We couldn't really say that there wasn't favor and truth in the law, though. We can't really say that there's not favor and truth in the law. We just looked at, for instance, what was we looking at? Deuteronomy 32 last week. Deuteronomy 32 and verse 4. says, he is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment, a Elohim of truth and without iniquity. That was the Torah that I just read. Right? So we can't say that, we can't kind of put these things against each other and say, well, we can't put these things against each other as if to say there's this one thing that's happening and then there's this other thing that's happening, and like as if to say there's no favor or truth, right, in the Torah, because we just read where Elohim's Yahweh's the Elohim of truth. So how is it that we have this thing here where it kind of looks like it might be some type of separation? I'm saying that
two separate things.
What's two? Yeah, it's two separate things. Like there's the law that was given through Moses, and then there's favor and truth that was. So I'm saying that they are. There is a separation. There is a distinction, but that's not to say that the Torah is void of favor and truth.
Right.
I wasn't interpreting the verse like the Torah is not with favor and truth, but Yeshua was like perfect, whereas Moses wasn't perfect. So that's the way I look at the verse as far as my interpretation. Like the Torah is perfect, like that law is truthful. That was written, but the actions was perfect through Jesus. Like he actually was the living form. I'm sorry, Yeshua. He was actually the living form of it. That's
right.
The way I look at it.
And
But
that's correct. But it's kind of different and the same at the same time. But the problem is that we have to be able to know that there is a distinction, but they're the same at the same time. If we think about this from a kind of a mainstream Christian mind frame, we're going to just have that distinction there, and we're going to forget about the similarities. And the King James helps us with that, putting that but in there, where it's like, here's this thing, but then now Yeshua comes and he got this favor and this truth. Here, can you put some more coffee in there? So let's look at what I want to do is look at I want to prove that the Bible is giving us these metonymies, and it's not just some kind of Greek thought that I'm trying to put into this thing.
Right. So what we're getting at with this verse though is that it shouldn't be separated, or
I'm saying that it is. I'm saying that there is a distinction that's being made, but we can't make that distinction be like black and white.
Right. Like,
as how, because mainstream Christianity would really have you believe that the Torah is void of favor, of grace and truth.
Right. So I'm saying like, so it's because how people would, you asked us how we thought in the beginning about it, and we kind of like separated it. And so you're kind of saying like to not separate, like not see it as two different things, or
I'm saying that is as hard as it may be, that it's both separate and the same at the same time, because it's the separate in terms of Moses came to do a thing, right? Moses came to do a thing in regards to what he did with the old covenant.
Right.
The literal Torah, the law was given, and was given through Moses, and he did what he did. But then now, this, as we're reading down, we're seeing what Yeshua who he was and then how he came, and then it's giving you this here verse 17 where it's talking about what he did. So there's a separation, of course, when we look at Moses and Yeshua, where Moses was even like a type of Yeshua. The role that Messiah plays really is kind of the role that Moses played, but like on a higher level. So there's a distinction, but I'm saying that the thing that makes it the same is when we're thinking about it from a holistic standpoint, we're understanding that what Yeshua actually came to actually do was to fulfill, not do away with, but to fulfill the law, which we know is not something that's like, being totally done with. It's just moving it to another kind of area. It's a remix. Just like we look at the new moon.
Yeah.
It's new like for the month, but it's still the same moon that's up there.
Right.
But it's new though for this month.
Right.
But you still basing it off of that thing that sits up there and it goes around the earth. So I'm saying that there is a distinction, and I'm saying that the King James is not wrong for having that but in there, but we take it too far, I think, and just make the distinction and forget about the connection. I mean, we don't, right? But mainstream Christianity, when they're looking at that, is making that. Yeah. Oh, see, it says right here, Yeshua got favor and truth.
Like basically saying what Moses was doing wasn't the truth. Like as far as like the law he was doing.
It's hard. It was hard. It's a whole other Elohim. He was a hard taskmaster. When you look at some of these Bibles, they'll even put Yahweh in the Bible. They'll put the name in the Bible, but as soon as you get to the New Testament, then it's just Lord again. They making a distinction, like as if that was that God way back then for them people, and then now we got this one over here, which is different. But I'm saying that there are places in the scriptures that we're able to look, and even though we see a word there, we can't necessarily think that the word, this sounds crazy, the word don't mean what it's saying, even though it's using the word. And we're going to look at that, even though that sounds crazy. Don't believe the word that you see in the Bible. Believe what I'm getting ready to tell you. That sounds crazy, though. All right, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about.
But it seemed like when you're in that mind frame,
which
Christianity,
you
probably will interpret it like when you're actually like my interpretation is how you said. I don't feel like it's separate. I feel like it's separate I feel like it's connected all through the same meaning. But when you're not fully in this mind frame that we're in, it will seem like a compare and contrast. I can see where, but I don't look at it like it's totally different.
Mm-hmm.
It's more so a transition for the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the right way to think about it. It is a transition of the same thing. It's a remix, not a whole nother song. It's just a remix of the old song. Yeah. Okay, but let's keep on going though, right? So let's look at, because I want to show that I'm not on this Greek frame of mind, this metonymy thing that's totally Greek. I'm saying that if we look back, we're able to see that even though this is this Greek concept that these men made up, it's a concept that they made up based on observation. They looked at you. You're able to look and recognize the concept, back in time. So let's look over at let's go to First Kings. First Kings 2, 3. I picked this verse because it got all of these words in it. Okay, so read that, just that third verse right there for me.
And guard the charge of Yah your Elohim, to walk in his ways, to guard in his laws, his commands, his right rulings, and his witness, as it is written in the Torah of Moshe, so that you do wisely all that you do, and wherever you turn.
So what I'm saying here is that when we think about the law of Moses, we think about the law of Moses. Here it's translated as the Torah of Moses. We could, when we think about the law of Moses, all of these other things are incorporated in that. That being his witnesses, his right rulings, his commands, and his laws. Right? These are all different words here: laws, commands. This is probably judgments in the King James here, and witnesses, as it is written in the Torah or the law of Moses. So within the law of Moses, you have his laws, his commands, his right rulings or judgments, and his witnesses, all in the law of Moses. So other places where we see, where in the scriptures where it's talking about the law of Moses, we could just see this, and these other things all are kind of implied within it. The witnesses, the right rulings, the commands, and the laws. Which, so if we see this, that's what metonymy is, right? That's, we're using this word here, this law of Moses, which is a phrase really, and these other things are all incorporated in that. Okay, let's look at another verse here. Popular verse. Oh, wait a second. I want 33 actually. Verse 33. Jeremiah 31 and 33. What'd that say?
31, 33. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yah. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people.
Okay, so when we look at that, we can't think necessarily that is probably actually Torah there. Let's see what the word is. Yeah. So we can't think that when we see this, that it's only like it's that the witnesses and the commands and the judgments are incorporated in this necessarily. It's kind of like an all-inclusive kind of generic term when it says my law. So it's kind of, they're using this one word Torah, which in that other verse it had law, it had commands, it had statutes. I don't know if it had statutes in that one, but it got statutes in this other one. But what I'm saying is that you have this kind of catch-all word that's meaning, all of the things that are incorporated in it. Because, we look at Torah, it's the best way to describe Torah is instructions, which is totally kind of generic, right? It's just, there's a lot that's incorporated in what instructions is. But when we think about statutes, judgments, commands, you know, when we have these things kind of separated out, it's, you know, it helps you to have a better understanding. Okay, one more example here. Let me get out of this version here. Whoops. $26. 27. Actually, 26 and 27, I guess. I read 26 and 27.
And I shall give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. And I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh, and put my spirit, Ruach, within you. And I shall cause you to walk in my laws and guard my right rulings, and shall do them.
Okay, so here now it's really talking about the same thing that we seen over in Jeremiah. But Jeremiah only just had laws.
Mm-hmm.
But over here it's talking about who cause you to walk in my laws and then guard my judgments and do them. Right? So what we see, you know, it's a common thing that we see in the Tanakh. We could see where it's talking about my laws, where it's kind of this, or Torah, where it's dealing with the whole, you know, the whole covenant, basically. All the things that's included in it, whether it be the judgments or the statutes or the commands or the testimonies and all of that. So when we look back over into back over in John, where we were, John 1. Oh wait, it's 1:17. I'm saying the difference that we're saying here, and we'll see this better when we look at some other scriptures. When we look at this, for the Torah was given through Moses, the law was given through Moses. The point that's trying to be made here is we're learning about Yeshua, what he came to do, and there's going to be kind of this contrast thing, or comparison, or contrast, or both, between what the old covenant was and what the new covenant was. All of you, when you were looking at this and talked about what you thought about this, were kind of on those lines in terms of seeing what it was that Moses did with the Torah, and then understanding what Yeshua did with what he did. You looking at it from a right perspective and understanding that Messiah is fulfilling the Torah. He's bringing to life what the Torah was, you know, which is all true. But at the same time, there is a distinction between what Moses did and what Yeshua did. And so what I'm saying is that when we look at this, I'm saying that this is when it's talking about this whole idea of the law versus grace and truth, we can look at that and understand that as being the old covenant versus the new covenant. Now we could say without a shadow of a doubt that what we can't do is say that there isn't favor. We already seen how there is truth in the law, in the Torah. We was able to end that real quick, right? Because he's the Elohim of truth. So how could there not be truth? Mm-hmm. But what about this? What could we say about, well, this is translated here as favor, but I think King James calls it grace. So what can we think about in terms of verses to say that there is grace? There's grace in the Torah. There's grace in the law of Moses. Just to kind of nail down this idea that even though there is a distinction in terms of the roles that's being played, we can't look at it and say that the Torah is void of grace. So if I was going to say to you, how could you prove to me that the Torah is not void of grace? Where would you take me? Where would you take me to if I'm putting that question on the table? If I said, show me how the Torah is not void of grace.
That's right. Basically just saying where is grace in the Torah? Because there is grace in the Torah.
Grace in the Torah.
Yeah, but how do you prove it?
I can prove there's grace in the Torah. Didn't I just read that one of those?
All right, bust it out. Hit me with it.
There's grace in the Torah. I just actually read last night where in Numbers, hold on. It was a situation where if a woman, I'm just going off the top of my head right now. If a woman is cheating, goes on the wrong path with her husband, and no one knows, there's no witness, and she's made herself unclean or whatever, stepping out on the marriage. And if the husband gets jealous, whatever the case may be, they got to go to a priest because there's no witness.
Numbers chapter 5.
Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there was no witness, but the man has like an intuition of jealousy. He doesn't trust his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Now the way it is like they got to go to the priest, and if the priest makes up this bitter water, he gets the dust from the ground, whatnot. So she has to drink it, let her hair down. Now, if it's a curse that's going to come on her, if she has, but if she really was being honest, nothing will. To me, that's fair, and it works for the man that was jealous. So like he just was just not trusting his wife, and she didn't do nothing. So either way it goes, that's grace right there. Because if she really didn't do anything, she doesn't have to suffer with the man on the other end. So that's showing grace on both ends. That's equal. I mean, that's you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So the Torah has grace, and it has grace when even in the covenant itself, when it's like if you follow this or whatnot, you will have all these great things. It's going to rain on your crops when it's supposed to rain. Everything your enemies will, they won't be able to come for you. Your 5 men will send away 100, 10 will send away 10,000, however it goes, 100 will send away 10,000. So it's like it's fair. It does show grace for those that follow it. So it's not like if you follow this, nothing, you're not going to see any good things or anything like that. So there's a lot with it.
Okay.
And there's even grace when it's like he gave the option of paying for your sins a certain way. It was like different little ways.
The low budget way and then the expensive way.
So like to me that's having grace.
He gave grace to Sarah when she couldn't have children. That's one I pulled. And then
Someone said something in the comments. They said there are many laws that say that once the man becomes aware of his sin.
Hold on, what?
B'nai Israel said there are many laws that say that once the man becomes aware of his sin.
Is he saying that in regards to being in regards to grace?
I don't know.
I'm just confused as to
Probably says that.
But that's true. Yeah.
Leviticus 4:28 KJV. Or if his sin which he hath sinned come to his knowledge, then he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a female without blemish.
Okay, yeah.
Sin which he has sinned.
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, so all right, so when we look at this, we cannot say then that the law that was given through Moses is void of favor and truth. But there is something new that Yeshua came to do, right? And we see the newness we see the newness even as we're looking at this in the context. We're talking about who Yeshua is and how he was manifest in the flesh. He was the very word of Yahweh manifest in the flesh.
Well, Benaiah just shared Leviticus 4:28 of the King James.
I think that's what he just read.
Did you just read that?
Yeah.
I'm just now seeing that. Your eyes are sharper than man's, young man.
What's that on the YouTube?
Yeah, this is on the YouTube.
Okay, so yes. So what we are saying here is that again, there is a distinction because Yeshua did come and do something different from what Moses was doing, but it's not this totally new thing because we can't say that there wasn't grace and truth in the Torah, because there obviously was, right? So what I'm saying is that what we're seeing here is, this metonymy thing where we're able to look at this thing. We're talking about the law of Moses and think about that in the as the old covenant. And we look at this idea of this favor and truth, we're able to look at this thing and think about it as dealing with the new covenant.
Right.
Okay, so let us look. Let us look over at. Let's look over at let's see what this is, because I want to look at I want to look over at now that we're thinking about this like this. Where did I put that?
Uh-oh, I need some glasses. What are you looking for?
I'm looking for something that I put in my notes and then we'll see. Hold on 1 second here. Okay, so again, when we think about this whole idea here of the law of Moses, and I said this a million times, we think about what the law is, right? The law teaches us how to behave in a way that the Most High will behave if he was a human, right? And we can see that through when he was manifest in the flesh, Yeshua. Yeshua walked on this earth and he walked according to the law perfectly, right?
Perfect.
Because the way that he behaved was according to the law. So when we think about the law that was given to Moses, again, that law that's given to Moses, when we do it, it causes us to act in a certain way. It's showing us the character of the Almighty. So, but so thinking about the way it's the same and the way that is different, the difference is that the Torah, the law of Moses, is external, right? It doesn't change who you are. It just, if you follow it, it causes you to do things. Right. It don't change your heart. Right. That's why when we see the scriptures where it talks about the new covenant that becomes necessary, that new covenant has to come, something has to happen with your heart, because in the old covenant never deal with your heart.
Right.
It dealt with you doing things.
In action, right.
Just strictly action.
Action.
It's not based on your heart condition. It don't change your heart condition.
Right.
It don't have anything to do with it. It's just about you doing things.
Right. I spoke on that post I did about the circumcision of the heart that I was inspired by the brothers to do. You know, I was speaking on the same thing.
Right. So we see that there was always a necessity for the heart of man to be circumcised. We see the kind of the picture of it in like the actual circumcision, where you have this kind of cutting away of of the flesh. Okay, so I want to look at this other thing that's along the same lines. We started off here in John where we see this this thing that's talking about, I'm saying that it's talking about the old covenant and the new covenant. The law that was given through Moses and favor and truth that came through Yeshua Messiah. But I think Paul also talks about this exact same thing in a slightly different way. So I want to look over at
Paul.
Romans. I think it's chapter 6.
Yeah, 6.
Let us read from, let's see, I want to see where I want to start. Oh, I want to read from 1 down to 15.
Sure. Ready? What then shall we say? Shall we continue in sin to let favor increase? Let it not be, which is a no. How shall he who died in sin still live in it? Or do you not know that as many of us as we were immersed into the Mashiach, Yeshua, were immersed into his death? We were therefore buried with him through immersion into death, that as Mashiach was raised from the dead by the esteem of the Father, so also we should, check this out, walk in newness of life. For if we have come to be grown together in likeness of his death, we shall be also of the resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man was impaled with him, so that the body of sin might be rendered powerless to serve sin no longer. For he who has died has been made right from sin. If we died with Mashiach, we believe that we shall also live with him, knowing that Mashiach, having been raised from the dead, dies no more. Death no longer rules over him. For in that he died to sin once for all. But in that he lives with Elohim, to Elohim. So you also reckon yourself to be dead indeed to the sin, but alive in Yah, the Elohim, and Mashiach, Yeshua, our master. Therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body to obey in its desire, neither present your members as instruments of unrighteousness to sin. Let me say that again. Neither present your members as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourself to Yah, your Elohim, as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to Yah, your Elohim. For sin shall not rule over you, but you are not under the law, but under favor.
Mm-hmm. What I say, read to?
I don't know.
15?
What then?
Yeah.
Shall we sin because we are not under Torah, under the law, but under favor? Let it not be.
Okay, very good.
No.
So we have this thing here, right? That Paul does a couple places, right? Where he talks about this thing of being under the law or under grace, right? You are not under the law, but under grace or favor. So we have to ask ourselves in the question then, so what is that even talking about? Because we've already established that the law possesses grace. So now here I'm asking you to do something that seems crazy, right? But I'm saying that when we look at that right there, it ain't talking about the actual word grace, because we've already shown that the law has grace. There's grace in the law.
That's right.
There's grace in the law. So when we look at that, we can't look at that as being that word grace, as if to say those two things those words, the law, the Torah, that word fights against grace. We can't say that because we already know that we could have went around the table. We could go around the table for a whole hour and talk about grace in the Torah. So that can't, even though it says grace right there, it says favor, it can't be talking about the word. I'm saying that it got to be dealing with this whole metonymy thing, where it's giving you a word that's kind of a category for something. That's my thoughts on the matter. But I'm saying, what could it mean? What could it mean to be under the law? Or not under the law, as it says here, but under grace. What's Paul talking about there when he says not under the law, but under grace or favor, as it says in that verse there?
How I want to word it.
I mean, because this is something that we have to understand this. We have to understand what it means to not be under the law, but under grace. Because not only do you have to understand it for your own self, but you got to be able to understand it for that person that's going to bust this out on you when you saying, I'm going to Shabbat studies, and you saying, you don't got to keep the Shabbat.
So
we're not under the law.
Right.
We're under grace.
Right. So,
what's he talking about?
So in the original covenant, you had the commandments or whatnot, and the ways that, like, it was all action wise. Like, if you did break one, you had to do this way. You had to pay your sin this way or whatnot. But now, with it being in your heart, like, it's questioning more so like, shall we sin? Like, is it okay to sin because you're not under the old covenant, but only under, like?
Oh, you saying old covenant? So what you saying, that under the laws of the old covenant?
But not yet.
Well, it's the Torah. That's from with Moses, correct?
I'm trying to figure out what you saying.
What the old covenant is what was originally given to the Israelites.
Yeah.
That's the old covenant.
Right.
That's the original.
Yeah.
Which is when the Torah, right?
Yeah.
Moses. So this question, what then shall we sin because we are not under the law? I'm thinking is like, as a more so like a metaphor, like it's, we're not under the old covenant, but under grace, like how it's supposed to be written in your heart now. So it's not, it doesn't mean that it's not supposed to still be enforced because we're not under the old covenant.
So you basically saying that you think that this is saying that that's talking about the old covenant versus the new covenant.
Not in a separation, because it says, God forbid. So you don't want to think of it that way. It's clearly answering that in that next.
Well, he's saying that in regards to the question was, for sin shall not rule over you. Where to say that at? Oh, verse 15. Shall we sin?
Right.
Shall we sin because we're not under the Torah?
Right. And it's saying that God forbid that though. So
That means no.
no.
Yeah.
Right. So that means you shouldn't sin.
You should.
Right.
Benaiah says that it's about sinning in ignorance, and he quoted Hebrews 10:26 out of the King James Version. Says, "For if we sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice to sin." I have to agree with him on that.
He said, so hold on. So is he saying that being under the law, is he saying that being under grace is sinning? Hold on, I'm confused about what the point is that he's making there.
What he's saying is about Hebrews 10:26. For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth.
I'm trying to figure out what it means to be under the law or under grace.
Well, what I get out of it personally, being under grace, is we're no longer bound by the guilt of breaking such transgressions and laws, because we got a way of redemption through Mashiach. So therefore we should not transgress just because we're under the grace. It doesn't mean that the laws is done away with, as most Christians do hold to that. But the Torah is the main focus, and Yeshua taught us that we should follow them, follow his teachings. But under the grace is because we're not held it's not burdensome, as spoken in John, I believe.
Yeah, First John.
Yeah, First John 5:3. It's not burdensome where it once was before the Messiah came, because like you sitting there wondering, like, I can't do this, and this is hard to maintain. But no one is righteous, no one is holy. We all sin and fall short of the glory of Yah, which is why we need Yeshua. So therefore, it's not burdensome, which means a form of grace. It's not that we should break the law.
Right, but see what you're doing is you kind of doing what the what Christianity does, and talking about this thing as if it's as grace only exists in this thing that you're under now, and it didn't exist before. And I'm saying that we can't look at that word there, grace or favor, and think that it's talking about the word favor and grace. I'm saying that that's a category. That's this metonymy. He's code talking. Paul is talking in code. When he's saying under grace, he's not talking about under whatever the definition for grace is.
When is it you're like trusting your, all right, in layman's terms, you got this thing that you enforce with your kid. This is what you got to do. You have to do it this way. You got to make sure. But now I'm not going to force and go over this. Say like every day I tell my kid, we have a talk in the morning at 10 o'clock. And every day I enforce what has to be done, this, that, and the third. But now, as now it's more like you already know. So just because I'm not coming to you every 10 o'clock in the morning, meeting with you and telling you this, you should already be automatically doing it. Don't mean don't do it because we're not having this talk at 10 in the morning every day. You get how I'm interpreting it?
Yeah, but what I would add to that is that you would call that conversation something. You would call it like blue.
All right, so
that's the only thing I'm adding to what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying, but you would call that conversation that you had at 10 in the morning, you would call it something.
Right, okay.
So what I'm saying is that what Paul did here is he talked about all the things that we're talking about in terms of what Messiah came to do. He's calling it grace.
Right.
he's giving it a name. It's a title. We could put some parentheses over it,
Right.
but he's not talking about literal like the what grace means.
Right.
What he's talking about the new covenant.
Right.
He's talking about the new covenant.
We just say,
But he's doing this thing. He's putting all of those things in this word, and the King James is calling it grace. This one's calling it favor. But he's talking about this idea of being under it. You're not under the law. You're under favor.
Right.
Now, if I'm thinking about this from a mainstream Christian thought process,
we separate.
I don't got to think about the law because I'm not under the law anymore.
Right.
But it can't be talking about that because when we look at on the opposite end, we already established that there's grace in the law. So we can't look at this and think that it's causing for us to look and see, oh, we're under favor. So what's the definition of favor? Oh, it's grace. It's this thing that's just given to me, that this thing that is not based on anything. I can't understand what it means to be under favor, parentheses, by looking up the definition of that word right there.
Okay.
What he's talking about is the old covenant and the new covenant, and using this thing, right? That's again this metonymy thing where I'm looking at a word that's there,
Right.
but that word is signifying these other things. But somebody has a
What's
question.
up with you, bro? I
Oh.
ain't seen you since you been out, man.
Yeah,
How you been? That's what's up, man. Hey, Joe got your number, right? I'll get your number from Joe.
Keep that out the classroom.
Three people have it.
Go ahead.
So, someone Lily 12 said that's what the church teaches, that we are under grace, no more law.
Yeah, that's what
Right.
the church did.
Right, but the difference is the only thing is that we are under grace.
That one.
We are under grace, right? That's what Paul's saying. We're not under the law, we're under grace. But we got to figure out what that means.
Can I take it
Hold on,
back at that?
hold on one second.
And then she also said, but the laws are forever, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Time to come.
Well, okay, so that's what we gotta talk about, right? That's what we gotta talk about. You said there was three things that people said. What was the third thing?
Grace is all about being given a certain amount of chances to completely give up all sins and laws. Just my thoughts.
Right, but again, what I'm trying to get you to get to is not to think about grace as being the definition of the word grace. And when you think about it in terms of having many chances, maybe it includes that because we have an advocate who is Messiah, who we can have many chances, right?
You don't get snuffed out.
Right. It's not like you don't get instant judgment. So there's grace involved. But what I'm saying is that when we see Paul using this term being under the law or under grace, he's not talking about the definition of the word grace. He's talking about the fact that we're in this new covenant that's the same but different than the old covenant. It includes those principles, but it's internalized.
Can I say something?
Well, hold on a second, because Chris, I think he turned his mic on, and then we started hearing this. Go ahead. What was you trying to say from before?
So basically, what I was going to say is that, since Yeshua has come, that we have been given. We're still held to the same standards, but we have been given this grace to be able to right the wrongs. Because back during the days when they were in the wilderness, when the law was given, it was clear and cut that if you broke these things had to follow. You had to be stoned. You had to be taken outside of the camp. And you know what I mean? You had all of these, there were direct results that had to be enacted when you broke these when you broke the Torah, when you broke the law. And
Yeah.
so now we have this grace kind of period. Like, it's like, it's like paying a loan or something. You know what I mean? You have a grace period to where you can repent. You have repentance now through the sacrifice of Messiah. You have the advocate, like you just spoke of, to where you get this grace that you didn't have before. And so now we have been opened up to a new thing where it's the new covenant, and we have this grace that gives us time to be able to right our wrongs and repent for our sins and be reconciled back to the Father.
Yeah.
I wanted to include in that, like in the Old Testament, in the Septuagint, when it translates the Hebrew word hen, as found in Genesis 6:8, describes why Yah saved Noah from the flood. In the Old Testament use, the word includes the concept that those showing favor to do gracious deeds or acts of grace, such as being kind to the poor or showing generosity. But however, divine grace is a theological term present in many faiths today, but it is defined as a divine influence which operates in the human to regenerate and sanctify, to inspire virtuous impulses, and to impart strength to endure trials and resist temptations. It's an earthquake, right?
No, I'm saying
No, that was me doing that.
I'm not.
And as an individual, virtue or excellence of divine origin. But I look at it today like we're giving grace period, like Chris said, grace periods. We're giving grace periods to show up to work on time. But does that mean that we don't have to show up for work? No, it don't.
Yeah.
We still got to go, but we're given a grace period to go,
Right.
in case we're late or not, with so forth. So I apply it to today. The same thing applies to us, that we're given this grace period because pretty soon that grace may run out when the time comes. It
will run out soon.
Yeah, it will.
But the only thing I add to that, right, is that's right what you're saying. But in order to look at this properly, this idea of being under the law or under grace, we always have to take it beyond the definition of the word. We always have to take it beyond the definition of the word, because you're going to get stuck right there when you're talking to your Christian person, and they're going to try to sit up there and put these things against each other. Well, we know that these things don't go against each other, because there's grace in the law. So we have to always, Hisky, make sure that door is open. We have to always take it that extra step to deal with these categories. Because when it talks about being under the law, when it talks about being under grace, it's talking about something. And it can't just be dealing with the definition of Torah and grace. It can't be that, right? It has to be.
It's like echoing.
It has to be. I was waiting for you to mute it, but it has to be these categories, right? It has to be that in order for us to be able to understand what it means to be under the law and under grace, right? We have to, it includes the definition, but it goes beyond the definition, because as we said, there is grace inside of the law. So when we talk about this idea of being under, when it talks about being under the law, we have to look at that and think about that in terms of being under the old covenant. Because even in this verse, even in these verses, it's for sin shall not rule over you, for you're under the law, for you're not under the law, but under favor. What then? Shall we sin because we're not under the Torah, but under favor? Let it not be. But sin is transgression of the law.
Yeah, dude.
Sin is transgression of the law. So Paul, if we look at this properly, we see that we find out that Paul talks in code. And people who he's talking about who have a Tanakh perspective when they're looking at the scriptures through their old, quote unquote, Old Testament glasses, they get the code.
Yeah.
But we on the outside looking in, when we've been taught from this quote unquote New Testament perspective, we don't understand what he's talking about. But if we're looking at it properly, it's easy to decipher. Shall we sin because we're not under the law? But under grace, let it not be. We can't. How can we not sin but don't have any thought about what the law is? Like, we got to be able to know what the law is so that we could not sin. He don't want for us to sin. He's not saying don't be lawless. You're supposed to be lawless just because you're under grace. Let it not be. So when we think about this idea of being under the law, we have to say what that is. We have to say and understand what that is. It got to be the old covenant. When he's talking about being under the law, I'm saying we could sit up here and take the law out and put an old covenant right there. And that's the point that he's trying to make. For sin shall not rule over you, for you are not under the old covenant, but under the new covenant.
Meaning that the Spirit should take over you, and you shouldn't be.
Hold on, talk up, say that louder.
Meaning that if you're under the new covenant, the Spirit should take over you, or your thoughts and your spirit, and push you away from the sinning man, basically.
Exactly that. It's for sin shall not rule over you. If we're in a state that's disconnected from the Almighty, and we don't have that spirit inside of us, sin does in fact rule over us. Our carnal mind is our master, and we do whatever our masters say do. Right? But if we are, as he says, hold on. If we are indeed verse 12, therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body to obey it in its desires. Why? Because you're not under the old covenant. You're not disconnected from the law, statutes, and commandments of the Almighty. They're inside of you. Therefore, do not let reign. You should be acting different. Sin shouldn't be ruling over you, because you're supposed to have been died with Messiah, like it talks about in the other verses, right? So he's telling us all of these things that's pointing us to these categories of the old covenant and the new covenant. And if we're thinking about it in the right way, we see what he's talking about.
So let's simplify it then. Let's go back to these verses. I want you to negate not what the definition of grace, what we perceive it as. What should be the correct definition of grace? I just want you to.
You talking about what verses you talking about? And here you mean?
The one we was just on.
Yeah. 15.
Wait.
I'm saying if we was to look at this here verse and talk about what Paul is trying to get for us to understand, I'm saying that he's trying to make us to see, for verse 14, for sin shall not rule over you, for you are not under the old covenant, but under the new covenant. What then? Shall we sin because we're not under the old covenant, but under the new covenant? Let it not be. Do you not know that to whom you present yourselves servants for obedience, you are servants of the one whom you obey, whether sin to death or obedience? Look what he's talking about. He's talking about your actions and those things which you do. If we say, and he started off talking about as far as being immersed in Messiah. So he's talking to a people who should be behaving in a certain way according to the Spirit and walking in righteousness. And but why does he have to say that? He must be having to say this because there's people who are just trying to just be lawless and say they in Messiah. When you can't be lawless and be in Messiah, because those things don't go together.
That's right.
Being in the new, I'm gonna give you a chance. Being in the new covenant is not a license to sin. It's not. So it includes grace. There's grace involved because according to the old covenant, there's sins unto death. You could literally do a thing and be killed with 2 or 3 witnesses and be dead. Under the new covenant, you're able to humbly go towards your master and turn away from those things and have another chance. So I'm saying that there's grace involved. We don't just take that word grace and throw it out. But what I'm saying is that we have to go beyond the definition of the word grace and think about it as being this metonymy, it's this word that's signifying a greater thing. It's talking about the actual new covenant. What was you going to say?
Would it be in a new covenant written in your heart as far as grace? If you're doing something passionately from your heart, you're less likely to sin. But he knows that we're not perfect.
Well, you saying from your transformed heart.
Right, your transformed heart, and you're living this way from the heart. So this is what you passionately want to do. It's really not a burden to you. He knows that we're not perfect. So that grace being given is because like we're going to be living or walking this way of the law honestly from the heart. So like, and as far as like I'm saying, present yourselves. If you have this in your heart, it should show. It's like leading by example, as opposed to me telling you you're supposed to live this way. You're supposed to but my actions are not. I'm not doing it myself, and that's going to be hard to lead people.
Well, it's impossible, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're to lead anybody when you're like, it's not matching.
Yeah. Somebody got a question on that?
Yeah,
Benaiah said something.
Benaiah said today's government says that ignorance of the law is no excuse. There is no grace in that.
Yes, that's correct, right? Even like the verse in Leviticus that was brought up, when you know that you sin, then you bring your offering, but at the same time, the guilt is upon you when you sin. So this is the thing we gotta remember. You just because you sin and don't know that you sin, it don't mean that the guilt's not on you. The guilt is still on you.
That is true.
I don't mean like feeling guilty. I mean like the consequence of sin, the fact that you did a thing and the Most High, there's a thing, let's just call the thing that's between you and the Most High when you sin, let's just call that guilt. That guilt is there whether you know it or not. You transgress, so that puts something between you and the Almighty.
That's right.
And then you find out that thing is there, and now you deal with it. So when we think about this idea of ignorance of the law, there ain't no such thing as that. There ain't no such thing as ignorant. You don't get a pass because you didn't know, right? If you're not doing the thing that Most High called for you to do, you don't get a pass, even though you don't know that you should have been doing it.
Right.
Now, are you talking when you say you don't get a pass? Are you talking about Hebrews who were given the law? Or are you talking about?
I'm saying in general.
In general.
I'm saying in general, you don't have to. I'm saying that say let's just say for instance, you didn't know that you wasn't supposed to take somebody else's stuff. You know it was his, but you didn't know that it was a sin for you to take it. So you just took it. You're not innocent just because you didn't know that it was wrong for you to do it. So, you know, the ignorance of the law don't excuse you from. I mean, that's just I can't sit up here and say to the policeman when he pulls me over, I didn't look at my speedometer. I didn't know I was going 60 and a 40.
Right.
I can't make it like there's not ignorance has never been an excuse for the law.
But the Most High is just, right?
He's just, yeah. He is just.
And so when he holds somebody accountable for something they don't know, would that be just?
The Most High is indeed just. But this is our problem. This is our problem as human beings, is that we are in a place that especially now we're so far removed from the Almighty.
Right.
We're so far removed, then we gotta sit up here and figure all of this stuff out.
Now you say human beings.
I'm saying human.
About Israel, or
no, I'm saying human beings.
Human beings, everybody.
Because of what we had happen in the garden, human beings, period, is disconnected from the Almighty.
That's right.
Israel is the way by which human beings are connected back to the Almighty.
But that was all messed up, though, right?
No, it wasn't messed up. What was messed up?
Well, that Israel was supposed to be that light.
No. Still, yeah, it's still,
but yeah, they still are.
Because listen, because if Messiah was slain from the foundation of the earth, the reason it wasn't like Israel in the flesh failed and then Yeshua had to come in and fix it. Messiah was slain from the foundation of the earth. So this whole plan was from the beginning. We see what Israel in the flesh did, but that only shows us that we need the spirit inside of us. It wasn't like the new covenant coming was like oh, that didn't work, let me hit you with this. It was the plan from the beginning. We were able to see the weakness of the flesh and the necessity for that ruach to be inside of us to be able to get us back to the other side. So it wasn't as if like there was like a contingency plan set in place after, like it was always the plan. So when we look, like thinking about it from this whole idea of being under the Torah and under grace, looking at the old covenant, looking at the new covenant, the old covenant was never a thing that was able to, Paul talks about it. It can't make us the law or the old covenant was never able to make us righteous.
Right.
It was only able to tell us righteous things to do, and then we do those things.
And that we're going wrong.
Right. But what the new covenant does, it changes our hearts and causes us to actually be righteous and do righteous things. That's the problem we get into when we talk with these mainstream Christianity people, and they talk about imputed righteousness.
Right.
But then you leave it right there, because there's imputed righteousness. There's righteousness that's given to you, but then there's actual righteousness. There's things that you are doing, as a result of the righteousness that's upon you. So we can't look at the fact that, the Most High looked at us and how we received Messiah and received his righteousness, and then that's it. And then you can't look at, well, all our righteousness are filthy rags and apply that to us in our life in Messiah. In Messiah, he's going to cause us to actually do righteousness.
Right.
But he's also going to put righteousness on us.
Yes.
Hold on, but in terms of holding people, everybody's going to be held accountable to their actions, the things that they do. And this is the reason why we actually have to get to work out here, because people out here living lost and they don't know that how they living isn't how they're supposed to be living, and they're going to be judged based on that. Yeah. I can't sit up here and say, I can only say what the scriptures talk about. The scriptures talk about the Most High showing mercy to whomever he wants to show mercy to.
Right.
But I don't know about him, just giving people a pass just because of ignorance. No. He could potentially do that, but I'm never going to tell somebody that you could you could depend on his mercy. Yeah. Because he don't deal that way as far as I can see. Right. He might do it. I don't have no indication that he would do it.
Right.
But except for he said he was going to give mercy to whoever he could give mercy to.
Right.
So if he's going to say that, then I don't have any criteria to base that off of.
Right.
The only criteria I have is that sin equals death. If you sin, it causes separation. So that's the only thing that I could talk about. So if some that's upright.
I like to
hold on.
No, I wanted to add to what Chris said about the ignorance. There is no ignorance to the law unless you're like a child who can't read. Because even though there's the King James Version, the New National, even though there's all these, if people's actually opening up their Bible, going to church and listening to your pastors, all well and good for Christians. If you're actually reading it, it's there. So there is no excuse for ignorance unless you're like a little kid who's still like. But for all adults, I can see why I wouldn't tell no one that if they don't know if they're okay. But I did used to think that.
Well, people are reading it and they're being confused.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Even like when I'm saying like how you read that and it says under favor, but he's telling you don't use or under grace. He's telling you don't look at it as grace. How somebody that's just reading it, like we a little bit understand, but how are they supposed to understand?
But you told me one day. Now I'm reading the Bible from beginning to end, so we don't like when I come here we get to scatter a little bit. But at home we're only in number. We're like this. We can't scatter right now because we're new to everything. But remember I told you I understand things. The message I get is way different than what I got years ago. Mm-hmm. So if your heart is so pure, and you're really hungry, and you really want to heal. He's gonna place, and you said that to me when I was talking. So if people's being confused, they're not ready. When you're actually ready and calling for, like I can read the 1611 King James Version, and even though it looks like crazy to me, when I read it with no problem. Yeah. But it looks weird to me. But I interpret it. Yeah. But if this was me trying to do this a while ago, I would not interpret it the same. I can see where the confusion is. So once again, the ignorance is really no excuse. If you're actually thirsty for it, and God knows that you want it, when you're reading this word, you're going to get it how you're supposed to get it.
Especially when you allow the Ruach to lead you.
Yeah, period. There's going to be no confusion.
Well, the thing is that what you saying has to be the thing that happens first.
Right.
Like
if the indoctrination comes first.
If the indoctrination comes first, that's why you got all this confusion.
Right.
It got to be the foundation. Got to be Messiah. When the foundation is Messiah, and you have that real conversion, spiritual conversion, establish a real relationship with Yeshua, then your spirit starts to open up your eyes and then now you seeing what's going on.
Easy.
So, but if my foundation is like just just
Jesus came to do away with the law.
if that's my foundation, and I don't have like a real understanding. The spirits never really is not doing the work that it came to do. Like if we understand that the spirit, I say this all the time, if we understand what the new covenant is, it helps us understand everything.
Right.
Because we know that the whole point of Yeshua coming was so that the law could be placed in our hearts.
I just say one
That's the whole point of it. Yeah, good.
So, you can reject the spirit. I rejected the spirit.
Yeah,
The spirit I was seeking with my whole heart, and the spirit was dealing with me, and the spirit revealed something to me, and I said, "Nah,
I think it's this. I think it's this.
I wasn't, especially when you're not ready to, because the spirit will reveal to you things that you might not be ready to give up. And that,
well, basically, it was the fact that we was Israel.
Uh-huh.
So that's what the spirit revealed to me, and I said,
Nah.
Oh, you did say that.
You said what?
I said,
that's white people,
that's
not
white
for
people.
us.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to bring out was the very next chapter. Paul talks about who he's talking to, right? He says, "Know ye not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the law."
That know the law.
Right? And so people are being confused because they don't know the law.
Right.
Because that foundation was set that, you ain't got to worry about the law.
Yeah.
Done it
Right?
with.
And so they're reading Paul without knowing the law and being confused.
Right.
Yeah, right, because he's talking in code. Right. But you understand the code if you got the right foundation. What was you trying to say?
What I want to imply was one of my notes, and I will bring it out later in one of my posts. But the key to victory in our struggles with sin, it lies not in ourselves, but in Yah and his faithfulness to us. Because Yah is near to all who call on him, like you said, everyone. And to all who call on him in truth, according to Psalms 145:18 and also Psalms 45:1. But there is no getting around it at all. Struggle, we all struggle with sins, according to Romans 3:23. And even the great apostle Paul laminated over on his ongoing struggle with sin in his life. For I'll quote him, "For I know that nothing good dwells in me that is in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me." And that's Romans 7:18-20. But Paul's struggle with sin was very real, so much so that he cried out, "What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from the body that is subject to death?" And that's Romans 7:24. But yet in the next breath, he answers his own question as well as ours. He said, "Thanks be to Yah who delivers me through Yeshua HaMashiach, our Savior, our Redeemer." And that's Romans 7:25. But in this passage, Paul not only provides us with the very key to victory with struggling with sin, but explains the never-ending conundrum between our sinful nature and spiritual nature. So then I myself serve the law of Yah with my mind, but with my flesh I serve the law of sin. Romans 7:25. And I will finish that and then compose it later on in one of my posts as I explain more in depth.
So what I wanted to really bring out here was this idea of understanding what under the law is and under grace is. Again, not to say that we are going to forget about the definition of the word favor there or grace. It's included, but in order to understand what's going on, we have to understand that what he's actually talking about is putting the old covenant against the new covenant. Because when you think about the idea of of under, right?
Right.
The idea of under, this thing that's over us, the thing that's between us and the Almighty. Your relationship, according to the old covenant, is hinged upon you following out these commands and doing them the way that it's supposed to be done.
I'm done.
If you under the old covenant,
I ain't gonna make it.
Yeah, I mean,
you can't.
Yeah.
But
Right.
and even now, you in a worse position because we not in the land.
Mm-hmm.
There ain't no Levites. There ain't no temple.
Got all type of different kind of cloth on right now.
Power Ranger uniforms and all that stuff.
If we were under the old covenant, you done but you done before you start. So what the thing that we have to understand is, this idea of, again, being under the law is talking about the actual covenant, being under the old covenant,
Right.
which again is an external thing. It's a thing that's external. It's a way that righteousness is done.
Mm-hmm.
The new covenant makes you righteous from the inside. It causes you to be righteous, not just doing things that are righteous. It changes your heart. Where before it didn't have nothing to do with your heart. Before it was you're doing a thing just because that's what we do. These are the things that we do. Now, when our heart is transformed and changed, you now desire to do these things. You desire to have a heart towards people, which brings us over to what you talk about in terms of people not knowing, is the fact that because you got a heart for people, we got to figure out how to deal with these people so they don't got to sit up there and be like, I didn't know, like, because that's a problem. That's a problem that you bring up. So the answer to the problem is, so how do I get to them to let them know, how to get in the door, like.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that when I look at our children, that they kind of were growing up like Israel before Mashiach, and in some ways because their Piskey was born into Jacob was born into this, like both of them are born into it.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been doing commandments their entire life. That's just their way of life. They never had it any other way. And so they have to come into Mashiach. They have to come into believing in him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like kind of for their own selves, like not just because of their parents' faith, but for their own faith, they got to come into that after having been under the law of the household, under the law of their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Now they come into the grace. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that they're in the old covenant, but what I'm saying it's kind of
but
like
they kind of are.
It's kind of like a similar type of a thing where they're doing things because their parents are like, this is what you're doing. You know what I mean? They're here because their parents are here.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're studying the Bible because their parents are studying the Bible. They're keeping the holy days and going away for Sukkot and everything because their parents are going away. They don't have nothing to do with what they want. And then when they get older, now they got to do it for themselves because of something that's on the inside of them.
Yeah.
So
when we look at the Torah, it gives us the pattern that we should be living, and that's why the pattern is still the same. We still got to teach our children. We still got to show our children the way, because they're just children. They're literally just doing what we say do. But when they become of age and they're able to make that decision and then make the thing real to them, you know, right now they just on our coattails as children, right? But you know, when we understand that the law is not done away with, we still have to teach our children the way. We still have to show them how they're supposed to be living. But likewise, so it's a direct parallel. It's a direct parallel how we deal with our children to how we deal with those that are out on the outside who need to be brought in. Where they're just these little carnal little things, just like little Moshe and Ari, how they just run around and all they want to do is just pacify their little carnal minds. But the people across the street, everybody, you know, who's I'm just saying across the street from anybody, not across the street from me. It's the same, you know, that's how you live outside of Messiah. You just do whatever feels good to you, and somebody has to come along and show you that that is not how it's supposed to be. We do that with our children, but there's people out there who they never had that, right? And then we got to be able to deal with those people, you know, like we deal with our children, showing them the way. How we got to how it talks about, you know, you sticking them with the law, teaching them diligently. Yeah, stabbing them with it. Like when you diligently teach them, that's how them people in the world got to be brought in like that. So there's a transition. It's coming from something. So when we think about this whole idea of, you know, putting the two things together in terms of the old covenant and the new covenant, you almost have to have that foundation of the old covenant to even really understand what the new covenant is, because you see what happens.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other.
You can't have one.
You can't jump right to the new covenant.
You can't,
because it don't make sense. You make your own thing out there. You a Christian just walk around with just the New Testament, and you don't know that homosexuality, you should do that.
Do it.
Justify
Do it.
Because
Right.
you don't got the old.
Right.
But that's what I think where said, like the New Testament is people who just reads that. Them writers assume that you read the Old Testament. So it's not like you
their
just read it.
Bible.
Their
Their Bible was the Old Testament.
Yeah, they're assuming the writers of the New Testament.
There was no New Testament.
No, I understand.
Continuation.
Yeah, but I understand for those who read it though, like it's an assumption that you already. So you can't just say, "Oh no, I already."
Yeah.
This is all the sequel, so you have to. It's like
Sequel,
it's like watching a second part of a movie before you watch the first thing. Like, you're not even going to get the concept that the person who watched the old one got it. Like if somebody see a movie that came out years later and they like that one, you don't embrace it the way I see it. Because I seen the original.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't seen
Part one. Now you
ain't seen Star Wars, then you ain't going to understand Empire Strikes Back. You know what I mean? You're not going to understand why Luke is missing a hand. All this different stuff. What happened to his hand? You know what I mean? So, I told a person the other day, I said, look, if you can't find it in what you call the Old Testament, it's not there. There's if you see something in the what you call the New Testament, and you're going on a course set by what you read, if you can't find that same thing in the Old Testament, then it's not there. You're in error.
Yeah. Right. The book is congruent. It all goes along with each other. So if you coming up with this thought process, and I'm sitting up here proving how I'm supposed to be living and putting that against what I'm seeing in the Tanakh, I got a problem with how I'm thinking about this thing. I can't use the New Testament to fight against the Old Testament.
Right. Yeah, and that's how they use it. That's exactly how they use it.
I'll never forget when I was younger, I was like, "You eat pork?" I wasn't where I'm at now, but I'm like, "Why I eat pork?" Because I like going to Sunday church. And she was like, "That was the Old Testament." Oh, they told me that.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
told me that.
You was at church when they said
I
that.
was at church because I told you I grew up 7 Adventist.
Yeah.
When I got older, when I got grown, I'm like, no, I'm not going. But I was real close with someone who was a Sunday keeper church once after I had my daughter, and I would go to church with them because that was their tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how y'all go to church? Y'all eat pork? This is me just asking that because of how I grew up. And she told me that was Old Testament.
That's Old Testament. Yeah. Right. So again, if we go all the way back to what we was thinking about in terms of the fact that we talked about the law came through Moses and spirit and truth came through Yeshua, looking at it from the right perspective, we understand that one is kind of the transition from the other one. What Moses came to do was an external thing. Let me see where that was. And is that in 1st or 2nd Corinthians where it talks about Moses' face shining and the people not the veil? I want to pull that up and be done with that. So I can't remember where it is.
What is it?
Oh yeah. 2 Corinthians chapter 3.
Was I talking about
18? Is that it?
Hold on. Let me find my cursor again.
2 Corinthians chapter 3. Wow.
Yeah. Let's look at this. We're gonna end with this. Let's read this. Let's just read this chapter because I think it's only 18 verses. 2 Corinthians 3. Somebody read that from verse 1.
Are we to begin recommend ourselves again, or do we need as some letters of recommendation to you or from you? You are our letter, having been written in our hearts, known and read by all men, making it obvious that you are a letter of Messiah, served by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living Elohim, not on tablets of stone, but on fleshly tablets of the heart. And such trust we have towards Elohim through the Messiah. Not that we are competent in ourselves to reckon any matter as from ourselves, but our competence and from Elohim, who also made us competent as servants of a renewed covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. But if the administering of death in letters engraved on stones was esteemed, so that the children of Israel were unable to look steadily at the face of Moshe, because of the esteem of his face which was passing away. How much more esteemed shall the administering of the Spirit not be? For if the administering of condemnation had esteemed, the administering of righteousness exceeds much more in esteem. For indeed, what was made esteemed has no esteem in this respect, in view of the esteem that excels. For if that which is passing away was esteemed, much more that which remains in esteem. Having then such expectations, we use much boldness of speech, and not like Moshe, who put a veil over his face so that the children of Israel should not look steadily at the end of what was passing away. But their minds were hardened, for to this day, when the old covenant is being read, that some veils remain not lifted because Messiah it is taking away. But to this day, when Moshe is being read, a vow lies on their heart. And when one turns to the master, the veil is taken away.
Okay, that's what I want to read to is 16. So when we look at this, right, it's talking about this. So when we think about the new covenant versus the old covenant, the law that was given to Moses, the external thing that was external, the law that they had, it gave them these things to do, versus the new covenant, which is the law in our hearts. We look back where Moses went up into the mountain and communed with the Almighty and came down, and that spiritual experience that he had was made him glow. He got so close to the Almighty that his face shone. But so the people didn't want to experience that the Most High on that spiritual level. That was scary to them. Like, right, they had to cover his face up. He's walking around glowing. He was so spiritual, right? They just wanted to just keep it carnal. Don't show me that. Like, I can't even deal with that. Right? Cover that up. But that's a picture of the old covenant. It's carnal. It's just physical, right? It's not dealing on. Moses got to that spiritual level where he had like a literal connection, where his spiritual connection with his physical connection with the Almighty was so strong that it manifests kind of in this like metaphysical way where he was literally glowing, where they had to cover him up. So when we think about that, like,
and he told the people that they could have the same thing too.
But don't you?
They circumcised their hearts, but they wouldn't do
it.
Right.
They wouldn't do it.
Even sometimes you even get. It's not necessarily like you're walking around and your face is just glowing, but you'll even get a glowing feeling in your body with this walk, because just knowing that everything's going to be okay, and just so I'm taking it as it's basically the same thing, but back then it was because I don't know if it was necessarily like him glowing. I just think his energy and the vibrant of his body was just like a whole glow in itself.
They literally put a veil over his face. They literally covered him up because he was a veil. But what I'm saying is that happened because of that. No man walked the earth got closer to the Almighty than Moses. He spoke with the Most High face to face. Other people just, you know, he might talk to them in a dream, and then you might have to go and tell somebody what the dream was so they could tell you what the Most High said to you.
Or you said angels are
but he spoke to Moses face to face. But when we think about what's going,
corrected people who thought they was speaking to him like Moses. He said no.
Right.
Don't speak to
he had to tell the sister and the brother about all this. But what I'm getting at is that when we see that, we see where Moses was a picture of Messiah, where he had that closeness, but then the people, they didn't want that. They didn't want that for themselves. They didn't want to have the closest for themselves. They just like, Moses, you do that. You figure it out, then you come back and tell us about it after the fact. But the new covenant is about you having that experience, right? Where the veil is removed. You're able to have that relationship with Messiah. Why? Because we're not under the law. We're under grace. We're not under the old covenant, where the old covenant's external. It's just it is the instructions. It's the instructions of Yah, but it's over there. Do this, do that, do that. Okay, I'll do it. But now this thing is in our hearts, and we are able to have this relationship with the Almighty and move beyond the external. Right? So, yeah, go ahead.
So, I think people misunderstand a lot, because Moshe not only was keeping the law, but he had that relationship with the Most High like nobody else had. You know what I mean? It was both. It was both even back then.
Right.
You know what I mean? He was keeping the law and the commandments, and he had that special relationship with the Most High, to the point where he was just like this super being, glowing and shining, and even to this day, like, we can get that close with the Most High, right? Through what Yeshua did, we have entry to get to that. And the closer you get to him, the more your light will shine, and the more the people will do the same thing to you. Be like, nah, like they'll see you coming, and they going the other way.
Yes. That's exactly what this verse is talking about in terms of the people. When they looked at Moses from that carnal perspective, they didn't want that. They the ones who came up with this whole veil thing. I can't be that close. I don't want that what you got. I need that middle thing. But now with Messiah, as you saying, that veil is removed in that relationship. Even when we think about what happened with the temple, with when Yeshua died and the veil at the temple split. It's the same concept. That veil was a thing that separated you from going into the holy place. You couldn't go in there because it was too holy and you wasn't holy enough. But now, because of what Yeshua has done, it causes you to be able to go over into the holy. But you ain't going in there in iniquity. You being made holy so that you could. It ain't just like it's just not free for everybody go in now. But you're changed, you're transformed so that you could be in there. But under the old covenant, there's nothing that you could have done to have made you holy enough, because you might be holy, but you ain't no Levite. You might be a Levite, but you ain't from Aaron. You ain't Aaron's seed, right? So,
Aaron's seed, but you're not the high priest.
So there's all these things that you had the classifications that you had to meet to get there. But because of what Yeshua has done, and you was bringing it out, is the fact that it's making us be what Moses was a picture of for us, was being these servants of the Almighty who are able to actually have this intimate relationship with the Almighty, and be able to walk and do his will. And it was the plan from the very beginning, right? So when we think about, looking at this, and it's showing us this kind of progression that we see in the law, the old covenant going into the new covenant, and this whole idea of being under the law and being under grace. The new covenant brings us to a place of relationship with the Almighty, but it cannot be this existence of lawlessness. It's just contradictory. Those two things don't go together, right? And the only way that we know that, right, we don't even know that the law is not void of favor and truth unless we know what the law even says, right? So we have to have that foundation for ourselves so we understand our own walk, but more importantly, so that we're able to relay this thing to the people who need it, so they're not stuck in the conundrum that Chris brings up about these people who don't know anything.
Right. So throughout this whole lesson, I'm back to simplifying. I like to simplify.
Please.
I think that's always, for me and anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But so grace, me, listening to this whole thing, I would I would interpret it after this as grace being a process. In the fact, in the way that
when you saying grace, you mean, what you mean by that?
Verse 15.
Well, I'm saying, we're not under the law, we're under grace.
Okay, yeah.
So, because when you're under the law, it was clear-cut penalties. You had to be X'd out. You had to sent out the congregation, all these different things under the law. But under the grace, us now with the new covenant having to build this relation back with the Most High. It's like that's like the grace is that process of building that.
Mm-hmm.
Being under grace, don't negate the law, and you ain't suffering a direct penalty of the law for breaking the law under this grace, but it's the process of getting back to this righteousness and developing this relationship through the Ruach, because you gotta have all of it, but grace will be is that process.
Yeah. Yes. It's absolutely a process. It's a process that we walk in, but it's a forward process.
But see too, yeah, because when we started out, we were saying grace was like either or. So I'm under the law, but I got grace, so I don't got to do the law. It's like you associate.
That's where people take it to,
grace with lawlessness,
right?
But to redefine it, grace is a process of righteousness.
Well,
grace is given.
I'm saying that
for you breaking the law.
I'm saying per the way we're looking at this, not to change the definition of grace, the word grace. When we talk about the idea of being under grace, all those things that you said is true. It's a process,
right,
of moving forward in righteousness.
Right.
Yeah, grace is included in that. Yeah, grace is included in the process.
Because we're gonna sin and you not hit the penalties of it, and you had that
right
that extent of grace.
Right, that is
grace. But to not to say that I don't have any parameters to move forward in.
Right.
You don't got grace sense. If you're doing that.
Yeah, grace is not a pass to do whatever you want.
Right.
Like
yes.
You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's what he said. No, you can't because you're not under the law, but under grace, you don't have a license to. Well, that's not exactly what he said, but you don't have a license to sin just because you are under grace and not under the law.
And grace has a time. Grace, mercy, all of these are things that have a time frame, a limit.
Yeah, judgment. So
exactly. Once
the
side come back, it's over.
Yeah, or your clock stops.
Exactly. Or you come before he come back.
Yeah.
Exactly. You the final judgment for everybody going to judge that
point. I think if there was one thing that you able to get away from what we was dealing with today is just the fact that when we look at this idea of being under the law and under grace, I'm saying that under the law is talking about being under the old covenant. And if you're talking about being under grace, it's talking about being under the new covenant. I don't want to say that it just so happens, but in the new covenant, grace is included in that. Because as you say, if according to the old covenant, there are sins unto death. You commit that thing, is done. You're done. Under the new covenant, you're not lawless. It's not just to say anything goes, but you're able to come back from it.
You can repent.
You could turn, you could repent, you could turn from that and live.
We call it like a process of repentance, grace.
It could be like a second chance.
It is that. It is. That's what it is.
But there's knowledge that goes with it. You can't not look at the law.
You must look at the law.
Exactly. So
you must look at the law. So the problem is that if we look at it just as being just that word, which mainstream Christians will do,
right,
we're under grace. So it's just but we're not under that. But you don't even know what that means. Mm-hmm. You don't understand what it's even saying. We understand as we looking at it from a whole Bible perspective that being under grace is being under the new covenant, and what that's talking about is now that thing that which was external has been made to be internal. That thing that caused us to do righteous things before, now in this new covenant is now causing us to be righteous and walk in righteousness. And it's important for us to understand that is more being under grace. This thing that we literally are under grace is more than just the definition of the word grace. It expands beyond that to actually, because that's just again, that's just abstract really. But there are parameters to that, and those parameters are the Most High's instructions, which is his laws, statutes, and commandments. Now, what we just looked at talked about the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, as where the new covenant now is not according to the letter of the old covenant, because again, if we were living according to that, then we fall, because it's set up to be this. It's set up to be this external thing. It's set up like that. But now we have this thing that before, if you sin, you had to go and get an animal and take it to the priest and he kill it. Now you're doing that kind of, but in a different way, where you're killing that part of yourself, right? And offering that up to the Almighty. That part of you is becoming dead, like that animal that you would take up. And you're turning from that thing and not doing those things anymore, right? You're thinking about the sacrifice that Yeshua did, and we have to revisit that thing, that he did for us, and use that as our sacrifice for sin. It don't talk about nothing like that in the old covenant. It don't talk about nothing like that.
All the animals died one time, and that was the only time it was going to be alive. The only time it was going to die, and after it was dead, there's nothing else you could do. You got to go get another animal.
Right. So it's a remix. It's the same, but it's different. But we're able to understand the differences only when we see what the foundation is, as being the Torah, as being that character of the Almighty humanized. It shows us how we're supposed to be and behave. We have to be able to understand, what it is that Yeshua did for us, and what his disciples are explaining in these letters, so that we can have an understanding of it, so that we're able to properly share these things with our people out there who maybe in mainstream Christianity, or maybe they don't know anything. You know what I mean? But it's important for us to be able to understand these things, because if we don't understand it, you're gonna get tripped up. We're gonna look at these things that Paul is sitting up here saying, and some well-versed Christian person gonna come up and they're gonna run some scriptures on you, and you're gonna be like, what is that? What do that mean? Let me go back and but you gotta be ready, right? Not only to deal with that person, but for your own self, so that you can actually know what it is that these things are saying there. Because if you're not strong in that, it's going to cause you to be like, man, they right? Maybe they right. Yeah, maybe I'm the one who needs to. Maybe I shouldn't be. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to kind of bring that, so that I think in these upcoming things, I'm going to try to get on some of these kind of apologetic type things once the year begins. But we'll get into that as as we go forward. So in regards to these things that we just was dealing with in terms of this, anybody have any thoughts or comments before we be done with this?
Just hit my toe. Keep y'all first. Focus on Yeshua and his teaching and not the doctrines of men. Follow what the scripture says opposed to what man says, and allow the Ruach to lead you to all truths, which he will show you, and open up yourself to be led by the Ruach. For when you operate without the Ruach, you fall in error by leaning on your own understanding. Shabbat shalom, people.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments?
I was gonna say that I look at it like a courtroom.
Just talk up soon.
I look at it like a courtroom where, we all are going to court, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all have someone who wants to represent us, right? Now you can go in there by yourself and stand on, whether or not you kept the law or not, or you can come in with that mediator who's going to fight for you,
Johnny.
Who's going to ask the Father to give you grace and give you mercy, and you can go in with, or you can go in without. And my hope is that you go in with, and that you get that grace and that mercy, but you still have to keep that law. It's still about keeping that law, but you are going to get what you can't get with that mediator than without.
I mean, people act like if you do the Torah, you don't have Yeshua, you don't have anything, you don't have grace. And it's like, well, I have grace too. I just do the Torah. But just like what you're saying. Am I going to go to a trial without an attorney? You know what I mean?
There's people that want to represent themselves.
That person's under the law. No.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So with that thought process, even though, we absolutely have the choice to go with a lawyer or not, but we gotta make it plain. If you're going without the lawyer, then there ain't no chance for you. Right. So I think what we have to, what we deal with is these people who feel like, well, they find out that they Israel, so then they start doing things. But you really behaving in a way that's according to the old covenant, lest you deal with Messiah first. Lest you come through some other door, right? That make you a thief and a robber, right? You got to come through Yeshua. I can't just find out who I am and then start doing things and think that I'm good. It got to be about Messiah first. I got to go and get that lawyer first. I got to get him first, right? It got to be that. So we got to be able to have that foundation so that we're able to get to that other level. But we on our way. Okay, so that being said, we're gonna go ahead and be done with this for now. We will next week we'll be so we'll be dealing with the women's thing, and yeah, that's right. Next week I'm going to the penitentiary. Yeah, that's next week, ain't it?
You're not going on the 30th?
No. The fourth week.
I thought you go on the
No.
last Sabbath of the month.
Right, so get ready. Get ready.
Get ready.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Next week ain't
That's not the last.